Starting. Okay, here we go.
All right.
All right. So today we've got Isaac Orloff. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Orloff. And Isaac works for what is the name of your studio? Something 8.
Storm 8. It's a game company in
Storm. It's Storm 8, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so we're just going to kind of have a hangout and a discussion today on. Hopefully, we'll get to the topic of kind of the pros and cons of working for a studio. But before we do that, I thought we could just talk a little bit about how you started. And I've got some questions here from. I put this out on my Facebook page. And by the way, if anybody wants to friend me on Facebook, I use my personal account as Will Terry. And when I do these interviews, I'm just going to put out a little feeler maybe the day or two before and just say, hey, do you have any questions for this artist? And so we had some questions that people sent in for you. So hopefully we'll be able to get to those. But tell me, where did you grow up?
I grew up I was born in Brooklyn, in New York City, but I can't really claim being from there because I only lived there for, maybe 2 years. And then I moved to New Jersey, northern New Jersey, Montclair, if anyone knows where that is. Do you know where that is?
No, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Maryland, just north of Washington, D.C.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I moved to Maryland to go to school. I went to MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, which is in Baltimore, and I lived in Baltimore.
I saw that in your bio.
Yeah, I think, till a year and a half ago, I moved out to San Francisco.
So you were living back there up to a few years ago, right?
You mean in Baltimore?
In the East Coast. I mean,
yeah, up until a year and a half ago. I moved out here in March of 2013, is it? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and all time flies.
what company you were working for? One that does Facebook games or something, right?
Yeah, I was working for Zynga. They were a social gaming company, or they still are a social gaming company. They had satellite studios all over the country. I worked at one of their satellite studios, which was in Baltimore. And that was my first studio job.
Okay, cool. So you went to the MICA, is that what it's called? Maryland? I should know. But when I was living in Maryland, I had no idea about schools or anything, and there was nobody was talking about going into visual development. I don't even think visual development was a word back then, Noah.
Well, I mean, I graduated in 2009, and there was no sort of visual development program or anything like that, even then. Now that just could be because the school is a little bit different focus. It's more of a fine art school. They did a lot of like traditional illustration, and amazing school for painting and drawing, but the whole entertainment art side of it was not really a focus of that program.
So what was the focus then?
More traditional illustration, a lot of book, editorial publishing. That was kind of it was kind of an old school department. When I went there, they've been kind of doing some modernizing and bringing in some teachers that actually are, character designers and entertainment artists and stuff like that. I think there's a demand for it now. It's definitely the most popular. It's a huge fad right now to be visual development, even if people don't actually know what visual development entails. They like the type of work that visual development artists do.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've thought that, but I haven't wanted to say that for fear of offending someone who likes saying viz dev.
Yeah, I mean, I say it just because it's the easiest way to describe what you do. I mean, I think a lot of people they say viz dev, and what they mean is they like to do elaborate, story beat paintings and lighting keys and stuff. What they don't like to do is texture callouts and model packets and model packets and model packets. But that's really the majority of the job. You do get some pretty fantastic work, here and there, but there's a lot of grunt work that goes along with it, and that's the side that you really have to be good at in order to, make it.
Interesting. So I was gonna wait to get into that because I was gonna go more like for the beginning stuff, but since we're here on that, would you elaborate on that? Because I think the most important thing I think for the interviews that I want to do, like yours right now, is to really help students to know what they should be working on, and what the jobs out there look like, what kind of skills they're going to need, and what the reality is versus what they're learning in school. Sometimes what they're learning in school is reality because they have instructors that are also working in the field, but often that's not the case.
Right. Yeah. And when I went to school, my instructors were not working most of them were practicing illustrators, and really talented ones, but no one had any actual, entertainment design experience of any, significant extent. So it was really hard to get feedback that was, tailored exactly towards that kind of work. I think there are programs that really gear their students towards entertainment design and give them a pretty good awareness of the kind of work that they're going to be doing. The art of books are great. It's like a small window, but it's very much like a very polished, idealized, kind of fantastic view of what VizDev is. It's not always all that everyone wants it to be. It's very glamorous, and that's what students see, and that's why they're brought, or they're attracted to it so much. But it's just not always the case. In real life, there's a lot of really gut-wrenching, development work that has to be done that can be painstaking at times. It's not always just doing enormous, beautiful paintings, which the art of books can give that. They can give that image.
So if someone were watching this, let's say someone's in high school and they're watching this, because I actually get on my YouTube channel here a lot of comments from people saying, hey, I'm in high school, this is what I want to do for a living, what advice do you have? I can't give good advice for working in a studio because I've never done that. And that's one of the reasons why I want to interview people like you who have that experience and who can give some good advice to those type of people. I'm showing some of your work right now. I'm on your blog, which is
oh yeah, this is my older blog. I update this one significantly less frequently than I do my
Tumblr. Where should I go? Should I go to, is it Tumblr or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's just IsaacOrloff.tumblr.com.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have gone there.
It's okay. That's the one that, it's so hard to keep up with social media nowadays. That's the one that I updated very frequently all the time, but there's been a really interesting migration away from Blogger.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I don't update it as frequently, unfortunately. I instead do much larger posts a little bit less frequently. So this is some of my newer, just kind of doodles.
That's really nice. It's really fun stuff, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to interview you is just because I've been looking at your work for probably 3 or 4 years, and I have sites that I go on of some of my favorite illustrators and visual development artists and animators, and it's interesting because I guess it was 6 years ago. Let's see, 6 or 7, probably 7 years ago. One of my friends, Lael Henderson, who is an illustrator and works for a studio. I was living in California at the time, and he said, "Hey, how come you're not blogging?" I didn't really even know that artists really were blogging. I was one of these guys that was falling behind and didn't know it,
Yeah.
And I started looking around and seeing other illustrators doing blogs, and I was like, well, maybe this is cool. And I said, well, I already have a website, and he's like, yeah, but nobody goes to your website because you never update it, Yeah, and so just in a few short years, I went from blogging to then seeing so many other people that were blogging from so many different walks of life in the commercial art, I guess you would say, set, but the different subsets are, I primarily before that I was only looking at illustration, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing stuff from all the animation side, which I never, went into that, never ever did any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you kind of have to stumble upon it, and that's the same thing I did, when I was in college. I kind of was surfing the web looking for all these illustrators, and I actually so the first artist that I really kind of grabbed hold of and really like took an interest in their stuff was Ryan Wood and Sam Nielsen, right?
Yeah.
They're out by you guys, right? In
Yeah.
Utah.
And
Yeah.
what's crazy is,
Yeah, and so it's just like I knew right away that that was what I was interested in. Before that, I was kind of scrambling because I knew I wasn't really into this, publishing style that everyone was pushing at school, and it was very fine arty. It didn't have like the drama that I was really looking for, but the drama combined with like the draftsmanship also. Like I'm always been attracted to really strong draftsmanship, and I just wasn't getting that. So once I found these like entertainment artists, it's like, man, these guys have amazing draftsmanship, and they've got like character and personality and everything all in the same work, which is really hard to find. So yeah, it clicked right away. And before that, I was like dabbling in like street art and like all sorts of different angles.
really,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
kind of a Banksy kind of a thing, or
Yeah. I mean, I had a big interest in graffiti for a long time. And that was not the correct road to go down in the long run. It's great for those who can do it, but it really requires, it takes a lot more than it gives back to you, unfortunately.
what do you mean by that?
The most famous graffiti artists, no one knows who they are.
Yeah.
No one. And there's only a very few people that have actually been able to monetize off it and actually create careers out of it, to the point where they can actually survive off doing it. And that kind of dedication comes at a very high risk. So it's not, I think, it's a little bit, I don't want to, it's a little bit easier when you don't have to rely on other people to get your name out there. With doing artwork and posting on a blog and stuff like that, you're really reliant on other people to share your work. You can't just put it in front of them. So it's really challenging to get your work out there when you're one in like, a few 100,000 illustrators that are posting work on blogs and stuff like that. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So I wish I had discovered entertainment art a little bit sooner, but better late than never. I've been working as hard as I can to make up for lost time.
It's interesting how so many people come to the field where they've kind of landed, or at least landed for the time being, from so many different directions. Like you're saying that I think a lot of students wonder, and maybe I'll stop sharing my screen now, but I think a lot of students wonder, am I doing it right? Am I on the right path? And I'll even have some, really second guessing what they're working on at the time. Do you think that being in the perfect program, that taking all the right courses is that the most important thing, or
the most important thing, hands down, is to be yourself and do what you want to do. If you're in a really strong program that churns out Disney lookalikes, then that could almost be a disadvantage to you because your work is going to look the same as everyone else in your class. You see a lot of people that come from kind of oddball programs they're a little bit off the beaten path, that have really original styles, and those people have a much more difficult time breaking into the field because they're not necessarily given the connections that people that go through those programs, but a lot of the times those people bring a much more unique take on, which is a huge advantage. It just means you got to work a little bit harder to get there. Because I know there are people who have come through programs, entertainment design programs, and they have teachers who work for DreamWorks or whoever, Disney, and inherently those connections will lead to work because there are people who can put you in touch with the right people right there. You don't have to email them out of the blue from the other side of the country and say, hey, this is me. They get hundreds of those emails a day. You having FaceTime with people is a huge advantage. So being a part of a really tailored, strong entertainment design program is definitely something you want to do. You just have to make sure that you never lose your sense of individuality. Because I think the individuality and like your own personal work being really strong is definitely paramount. It trumps everything else. But being in a strong entertainment design program that shows you what kind of work you need to be developing. I think that is equally or a very close second to the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So would you value, you mentioned that at some of the universities or some of the art schools, they're gonna churn out people that are gonna look more like Disney, and
I
then
just as an example. There's I'm gonna use the word homogenization. I think that's the word of kind of animation style, which is happening, and part of it is due to the internet and Blogger and everything. Like everyone looks at each other's work all day long. Like you look at 100 Instagram pictures, and then before you know it, your work is going to be kind of a compilation of all those things. And it happened to me. I had, and maybe it still has happened to me, I don't know, but I was getting feedback from studios saying like, hey, your work is pretty solid, but it kind of just looks like everyone else's. There's nothing that's really setting you apart. So
really, so they told you that?
yeah, yeah, and that was like a real kick in the pants, because I didn't even think about that, and
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at the stuff I have. It's like, okay, I've got an RV drawing that has a lot of bags on top. How many of those have I seen in other people's portfolios? And it's like, oh yeah, I've seen probably like close to 100 of those, in other people's portfolios. If I'm just drawing the same content that everyone else is drawing, like, then there's nothing interesting about that to other people.
When I first saw your work, I didn't think that at all. In fact, it was really unique, and I remember I'd have to go back and keep clicking the back button on your blog because it was like 3 or 4 years ago. But
do that.
Those images that you had of like the desert scene, it's like a western, like a car driving through a western rocky landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I just love those.
Thank you. I'm glad.
I still remember, and to me, it didn't look like I had seen it before. It felt different.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think some of my older work, you can tell when I was influenced by other people. I think, not necessarily like I was drawing directly from someone, but there's just certain stuff which is a little bit generic that a lot of people are doing, like little style cues that are very common in a lot of people's work. Very detailed, like the average person might not even pick up on it, but that's what a lot of people look for is they're not necessarily looking for that perfect animation style. They want, if you look at artists like Lou Romano and stuff, they're so far outside the box. That's kind of what they want is people that can bring like a unique vision that other people can draw inspiration from, not necessarily just someone who can do animation art really well.
So that brings up another good question. So then, how do you get that? How do you get that unique look, and how do you distance yourself from everybody else and looking the same? That's another question, right?
Well, what I did is I stopped going online. I didn't look at anyone else's blogs for over a year. Even now, I'm very hesitant to really spend too much time looking at other people's work. Like I used to spend hours, just combing through, getting inspired, and it's awesome and it's so much fun, and it's also really daunting. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I gotta draw, because like all these people are so good. But I just, I just stopped that, and I was like, okay, what do I want to draw? How do I feel? I know the concepts. I know, like, everyone knows the concepts that you're supposed to be enacting to make your work good. You just have to remind yourself. You have to pinch yourself throughout your drawing and be like, okay, did I exaggerate this enough? Is this really the right anatomy? Have I flipped this drawing to see the problems in it, or am I just going to power through and, do it because I want to do it? Taking those steps while I'm working, and reminding myself to, really be thorough about getting the most out of my work. I could try to focus on that instead of looking at what other people are doing and trying to, do something that compares with theirs. Like so and so did a really good sci-fi piece, so I want to really do a really good sci-fi piece. Instead of thinking of it that way, just like what do I want to draw? Like coming up with ideas, coming up with your own ideas is the most important thing, because you can always tell when someone has a really strong concept, because there's a lot more. Their work looks like a labor of love and not necessarily just like a like, oh, I'm going to do this because everyone else is doing this sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how do you so for me, I go down to the raw shape sometimes, and I go, I'll go through the same thing you're talking about. Like if I feel like I've looked at people too much or consumed too much art, which I like to consume a lot because I feel like it does inspire me. But then I feel like I don't have a problem putting it away and kind of doing a riff on out of my own head on some of the things that I've been inspired by.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, I will admit that I looked at other people's stuff and just kind of took this and took that and kind of combined stuff, and and I don't think there's anything wrong with that in the beginning when you're learning.
It's imperative. You have to do it in order to learn. You know, absolutely.
But at some point, you have to get to a point where you have your own process where you can actually. I'm trying to find those questions that from people who are there. So yeah, I think you have to be able to go off on your own and start making shapes. So that was the thing I was going to ask you is, does it come down to that for you, the individual shapes that you're making and trying to vary those and trying to come up with different things from the raw elements of the beginning of the drawing? Or
yeah, I mean, I think I did a post on Twitter one time or something. I don't have any tattoos, but if I was to get a tattoo, I think my first tattoo would be the words "shapes first" on my right hand.
Oh,
I could just, because that's something that's so easy to forget, but it's how you should start everything. Like whenever you're designing a character or a drawing, like just block it all out into like the most basic geometric shapes, and then you can noodle it down from there. It's something that I struggle with. I know it. I know the concept. Like I know that's what I'm supposed to do, but it's so easy to get noodly with like form and thinking in the moment instead of thinking broad. Thinking big picture and like overall shape and composition, even of just one character, is always the way to start. And if you're having really tough time getting started, that's a really great way to kind of get over some writer's block, is just getting out a big brush and making some funky shapes, making a small, medium, large shape and putting them together in different ways and seeing what you can turn it into. So yeah, shape is always the first thing.
I would never think that would ever be something that you'd have to reinforce in your mind, because when I look at your stuff, it's just so obvious that shape is important to you. It really is to me too. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I was attracted to your work initially, is because it's kind of like it's so important to me, and I guess I understand where you're coming from, because I have to remind myself too.
I mean, every artist, no one does everything perfect. There are artists who you look at beautiful, simple drawings, you're like, oh, how did you draw this? Like, it looks so effortless, but what you don't see is like, the 10 ghost layers of sketching below that they've turned off and off and off until they get the line exactly right, and then they do like a stroke exactly in the right spot. So just because stuff looks simple and looks effortless, that doesn't mean that it is. That's
true.
what I've learned.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Or at least maybe I just tell myself that to make myself feel better. But no, I know for a fact that just because something looks easy, that doesn't mean that it is. There's a lot of like really, really labor-intensive design work that goes into everything, even the simplest of drawings. Yeah, well, and it's not the same for everyone. Some people do it effortlessly, but the reason they can do it effortlessly is because they've gotten that mileage in of doing, all the labor of doing it 1,000 times wrong previously.
It's good for me to know that you struggle a little bit.
Everyone struggles a little bit. Everyone has their thing, that they just hate drawing, or they can't get right the first time,
Yeah. I think that a lot of times I'll get comments from people that just say, I really want to be able to do what you do, and how do you get to be good? And I think that if they saw my process from start to finish, they would be, oh, oh, huh. So there's an ugly stage to it.
Oh yeah, and I always tell people, like, when you're in the ugly stage, like, you can't stop. Like, no. If you're in a piece, you cannot stop in the ugly stage, because if you stop in the ugly stage, you'll never finish it.
Right.
I've had, like, half a dozen pieces, at least, probably like a dozen plus pieces on my hard drive right now that I stopped at an underpainting level, and they're so ugly. There's so much work left to do that I'm just not willing to go back and, and go into it because I'd rather just start something new.
Yeah, I get some where I didn't do due diligence in creating good shapes and a good composition in the beginning, and I've gone too far, and then I realized it after the fact and gone, okay, well this is one of those planes that's lost a wing and it's just destined to crash, so we'll just let it crash.
Lay it to rest.
Here's a couple of questions. I want to make sure that I get these in from Sergio. Saying that he has trouble making environments. So what would be your advice for, and I've heard this a lot, and some people refer to them as backgrounds, some people refer to them as environments. What would be your advice there in learning to develop good environments?
Well, there's a couple things that go into environments. I think there's a lot of people that treat environments as backgrounds. They think, draw the character and then fill in the space behind it, and that's the wrong way to approach it. It is a way to approach it, but it's not going to lead to really strong environments. Your environment will always look like an afterthought if that's the way you're going to approach it. And it's funny because that's actually something that I learned from street art. Because the way graffiti artists work is they do their piece of graffiti and then they fill in the background behind it. They don't actually consider the background, and there's very little interaction with their piece of graffiti that they do and what's going on behind the piece. And it's funny because the same exact concept gets applied in a lot of the art that people do, is because they love drawing characters, So they draw a character and then they fill in something quick behind it to fill out the space. And it's always obvious because there's no real interaction with the character in the background, and there's very little storytelling outside of the character. What I like to describe environment design as is, I think environment design is character design. All the same principles apply. The same way you would exaggerate a character is the exact same way you'd exaggerate, an old wood burning stove or a table, or anything. The same amount of push and pull and shape language, the same concepts all apply. So if you have a really strong, understanding of those concepts, then you should be able to do environment design just fine applying those concepts. If you are drawing characters but not thinking about those concepts constantly, then you will have a difficult time with environment design.
Really good.
Yeah, so you want to, starting with full compositions first. Don't just start with the character. Think about, maybe a good way to do it is, what I do is I'll pencil in the character last. I know where the character is supposed to go, and I know what I want the character to be doing. But instead of just drawing a character, and then getting it noodly and then figuring out the perspective of the environment to match the character, figure out your perspective first. Figure out your big, broad shapes, of your composition, and then, once you've gotten like a pretty gestural layout, then you can go in and actually add the details of the character. Would
you say that going through an illustration program prepared you to learn that better than? Do you even know? Do you know what they go through in a visual development program?
Yeah, I mean, I've had friends that go through it, and I've seen the work, the kind of work that they do. I think being in a traditional illustration program is a disadvantage in that respect, because they don't teach you those kind of concepts, like how to exaggerate, the concept of shape, big, small, medium, all that, exaggeration. They don't really teach that stuff. It's more about finding your personal style. And that's all great, but if it doesn't have the concepts that you need, then it's not really going to take you where you need to go.
I've kind of felt like in order to get the complete package, you really need like 6 years.
I don't know. It's really
like you need. I think illustrators need animation, and I think animators need some illustration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. As far as timing, I don't think there's any answer. I think, yeah, I could go back to school, and I thought about going back to school. Like, man, if I go back to school now, I would kick ass. It'd be great. I have all this time to do all these assignments, but the bottom line is, like, sometimes there's just no going back. yeah, you could always go back to school and you could always be better, you know. But where does that end? When are you good enough? You know, the
Right.
bottom line is like never. You know, you could
That's
if you
right.
give me 4 years to go and work strictly on non-studio related assignments or whatever, then yeah, I would create some amazing work. But I don't think there's ever a time when that wouldn't be true. You know, artists are always growing.
Right.
No, I think the answer to that is just to always make sure that you're still growing outside of whatever your work is. You know, if
I've
as long
heard
as you're
that from I've heard that from a lot of the more successful visual development artists or animators. Don't be content once you do get the job. Um, and you probably have seen some of those guys,
oh
right?
yeah, this is a perfect segue into life. Yeah.
Elaborate. So,
So okay. There's a lot of pros and cons of studio. Working in studio.
yeah.
Every studio is different. Everyone has its own unique culture. So whatever I say about studio life might not be true for someone else's studio. I've worked in two. I've worked on site at multiple studios. I think 4 or 5 studios. But for an extended period of time, I've worked at two gaming companies with very stark contrasting um, cultures. I think the biggest danger in working for a full-time studio artist situation is that you can lose yourself very easily. I had a moment like that at my last studio where I I had a point where I was looking for work and I was looking through my portfolio and thinking, okay, I got to show the best of what I've done at work here and, the best of what I've done in my personal work. And, um, when I was compiling it, I was realizing I'd done, only a handful of pieces in the last year,
Hmm.
and there weren't pieces that I really felt that strongly about, and I
Do
was
you
going,
do you mean a handful of pieces for yourself?
yeah, a handful of pieces for myself, and there wasn't a lot that I was really feeling was portfolio quality coming out of my studio job.
Mm.
Because the bottom line is studio work is studio work. You're not necessarily going to be doing something that you're really excited about all the time. You got to do what is needed of you, and it turns out what was needed of me is not necessarily something that I felt. Uh, it wasn't work that I felt represented my artistic abilities, but it was what was needed. And that's what's going to happen sometimes when you're at the studio. It's not about doing the best work that you can do. It's about doing what is needed of you to help create the product. Because bottom line is you're creating a product, and that is the goal.
Right.
Creating a high quality product. So you're not necessarily going to do like amazing background paintings with like the best lighting, like most accurate lighting ever. You might not have to do anything that has to do with lighting the entire time you're at the studio.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to continue to grow at learning lighting and storytelling and things maybe that you're not using, that's on you to do on your own time. And there's a lot of artists that do get that cushy studio job that stop drawing completely. They don't maintain blogs, they don't draw any. They kind of shift to a art is my job and not art is what I love
Mm-hmm.
sort of mindset. And I think that's everyone is welcome to do that. I think it's a little sad, because so many of us feel so strongly about art. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we live it. It's not just something we do at work.
Right.
So I think it's sad when people lose that excitement, and I think it's also the studio's responsibility to keep that excitement for their artists. There's
That's a good point. Some studios do that by giving you figure drawing time, right?
Mhm.
Have they done that at your studios?
They have done that at both studios that I've worked at. Figure drawing is great. I don't know if it's. I think figure drawing is across the board like one of the most important things you can do, hands down. As
Mm-hmm.
far as maintaining like excitement about art, I don't know if that's the best route in terms of
Mm-hmm.
keeping your artists excited. I think it's there's a lot of managerial stuff that has to go on in terms of how you assign projects to people, making sure your artists aren't getting burnt out, being really careful with your hires. If you end up with a studio with four, if you have a small team of artists, 6 or 7 artists, and 5 of those artists, or 4 or 5 of those artists are kind of work stays at work and don't draw outside of work artists, and you got one artist that wants to draw outside of work, then that's going to be a really tough situation for that one artist that really likes to draw,
Mhm.
outside of work. I like that the studio that I'm at now. People talk about art all the time, and people do personal work on a regular basis. I think everyone around me, maybe it's not as frequent as they like because they've got kids or whatever, but everyone seems to really enjoy talking about art, and I think they've done a really good job hiring people that all have similar interests in, growing their artistic abilities and actually living as an artist instead of just going in and doing your time as an artist, then going home to do other things.
Yeah,
So,
that's good. My
yeah.
my friends up at the Disney studio here in Salt Lake, Avalanche, Ryan Wood and those guys, most of them do a lot of stuff after hours and on their own time. And
Hmm.
they were our last Comic-Con. They were out there with their tables selling prints and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's awesome because if you're constantly working on someone else's stuff, you're going to atrophy in some areas, right?
Yeah, it happened to me in a big way. I realized I was put in a position where I had to do orthographic building drawings for years on end and wasn't really given a break. And I was, I didn't.
What is that? What's an orthographic building drawing?
Or isometric building drawing, which is basically no perspective, top-down view. It's useful for game art. It's really important that you know how to do it because it enables modelers to model up your drawing, and it's great as far as pipeline implementation and stuff. But I wasn't really doing any character work for a really long time, like a really long time, and I would do little doodles here and there, but I wasn't like getting to like really get into the nitty-gritty of a character.
Mm-hmm.
And I atrophied a little bit in terms of my character design sensibilities. So I was really wary of it. I was really conscious of it. I was just so burnt out at work that I wasn't really getting a chance to, give it my all, when I got home. Because bottom line is, if you work a studio job and you come home and you do personal work afterwards, like I think about this all the time. I'm really only giving myself like, my energy level is not 100% when I'm sitting down to do personal work. I'm, 30%. I'm tired. I've been working all day. There's
Right.
content I have that are really inspiring. But the bottom line is, I would love to see what kind of work I could do if I started my personal work at 9 o'clock in the morning. It didn't start at the studio. Because it's tough, it's really tough. So yeah, I don't know about going back to the studio thing about maintaining personal work. It's really important to do. You can get to a point at a studio where you realize you become the studio, and part of the studio, and you're not necessarily who you used to be. It's really easy to do that. Like studios will give out swag and like free T-shirts, and it's really easy to just like start wearing those T-shirts. And you should always be proud of where you work, but you never want to lose your sense of self and individuality, and that's I think the biggest drawback from working in a studio. But there's so many pluses that those being around creatives. I think people who don't work in a studio, the thing that they miss the most, the thing I hear from all my friends that don't work in studios, is that they miss being around other creatives and other people.
That's me. That is hands down. That is. I have been jealous of you guys in so many ways from just not being able to just be around like-minded people.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah. Well, thank God for the internet, huh?
I mentioned this in the last interview I think that I did with Dennis Zilber, is that I used to call artists out of the blue just to have somebody to talk to. Pre-internet, you couldn't get on Facebook. There was no Facebook. There was no email. It was just you and your studio. And if you gathered some artists to go out to lunch, then you got to do that. But other than that, I would just go, I need to talk to another artist. I'm going to just call some random person out of the directory. And so I used to do that all the time.
Yeah, I've done it before. Me and Ian Abando, just a few times, but we used to do Skype calls where we just be working on stuff and shooting the shit while we, while we draw. Talk about, hey, what are you working on? Like, get some feedbacks, do a screen share, like paint overs and stuff like that. I've done it with some other artists also. It's a great thing to do. I think networking between artists and like riffing is the best, and that's one of the reasons why I moved here to San Francisco, is because I wasn't getting that kind of in-person like art culture vibe from Baltimore. It's a really small art community there. And here, like if I want to go sketching, there's a bunch of people that I can ring up and be like, hey, let's go out and go draw. Or it's also cool to just hang out with artists, you know, like go and we'll do an artist dinner night, you know, 6 or 7 artists all go out to eat and just talk about industry stuff or whatever, or just nothing at all that has to do with art. But being around people that are like-minded to you is super, super important. So being in the studio definitely gives that advantage, gives you kind of a safety, social net, a social safety net of artists that you can rely upon. Yeah, but making sure that you maintain your individuality is definitely important.
That's great. Here's another question from Marie, and it's kind of a general question. So this one you could take in different directions, but she asks what your greatest resources for improvement are, such as like I guess she's talking about like reference. Are you looking at websites? Are you looking at books? Like how do you get better? I guess is what she wants to know at this point right now.
That's a really good question. Everyone uses Google image search. Everyone, I mean, so you know that's great. Oh, hands down, I know the answer to this. It's a really vague answer, but it's really important. The world around me, you know, going outside from like life is the biggest source of inspiration, hands down. Google's great. You know, looking at other artists is great. Art books are great. But the bottom line is, if you're looking for inspiration, just go outside.
Yeah.
You know, like you want amazing lighting, like okay, go outside at like 7:30. You know, like or go outside. Like what kind of lighting are you looking for? You can find it. You know, any time of day, just go outside. You know, like shoot your reference photos. Go on a New York. If you live in a city with public transportation, ride public transportation with a sketchbook for 3 hours, and you'll get better character designs than you will get for days of Google image searching. Hey, I'm looking for like crazy old man. You know, you're gonna get like the same old crazy old man photos that everyone else is gonna get when they're googling crazy old man inspiration. If you go out there, go post up outside like a senior citizen, facility, you're gonna get all sorts of ideas. So,
you mentioned taking pictures. That's one thing that I do a lot is with the camera phone is just constantly taking pictures of stuff. Yeah. It's like you mentioned lighting. You can't really sketch that real quick,
Mm-hmm.
So take a picture and start to develop your own little image bank.
It's an idea, like it's foggy out here in San Francisco, and like every time I see cool fog, I'm like, gotta draw it. I gotta draw it. Like I really want to draw it. So like I try and come home and I just like do a little fog sketch, just thinking about how the colors interact and the lighting and stuff. So spending a lot of time outside and taking in your environment is really important, and it shows in your work too. Like you can definitely tell where people are from. Like you look at the buildings in their environment sketches.
Yeah.
Stuff they do in their personal work. The stuff where they're not designing, where they are just doing what's kind of in their subconscious. Because when you're doing your personal work, a lot of times what comes out is just visual information that you've taken in, and you're just regurgitating it onto a screen.
Right.
And so yeah, that's you look at some of my older work and it's like, okay, those are Baltimore row houses.
I was just gonna say that when I saw your work in the beginning, because I grew up in Maryland.
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder if he lives on the East Coast.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things I thought.
Yeah, there's brick in those buildings. Yeah, so it's really important. Like I envy the artists. We have BART here in San Francisco, but I envy, people who live in New York and have access to the subway, because I would just sit on the subway for hours, like on the weekend, and just draw, because it's just a constant parade of life drawing. That's such an amazing resource I don't care what Google Street View can do, like it just never ever can translate like the amount of personality you can get from drawing from life, and that is definitely the best resource that you can get. And a lot of artists nowadays want to skip that. They don't want to do life drawing because it's time consuming, and it doesn't always yield the most beautiful, polished results that people like to post on their blogs. But the bottom line is the artists that draw from life regularly are the best artists out there.
That's a really good point. In the school that I teach at UVU, for some reason one of our figure drawing classes didn't fill up and they had to cancel it. And I wondered what the reason was. Is it what you're saying? That's a good point. It could be that because a lot of times what you do in figure drawing is not the kind of stuff that you want to post, because you're concentrating on proportions and you're not really concentrating on making beautiful lines and creative, crazy shapes and stuff like that.
There's no exaggeration to hide behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line, is that it exposes your, your most personal flaws in your work, because it's so basic. If you're not getting it, then you can tell, everyone can tell. So, yeah, it's kind of a gutsy thing to do, post-life drawing stuff. But the artists who have a really strong sense of anatomy definitely do the best work, and it's something that I know I need to do more. Everyone can always do it more. We do life drawing sessions at work, but I need to make more time to actually go out and sketch from life. So that's been on my to-do list. It's just hard when you're so busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is definitely important.
That's a great answer to a good question.
Like a plugin, a life drawing plugin, right? Where you can just brush over on your screen and the figure shows up.
Yeah. Here's another one from Nicole. When doing a concept, how do you know when you've got the one, quote unquote?
The one. So it could be because my art director tells me so. When you're excited about it, when your work is something that tickles your fancy, where you're just like, this is I'm excited about this concept, like this. I feel like this is really properly illustrated the idea that's in my head. Like I'm getting the emotion from this drawing that I have been, thinking about for the last couple days. I'll think about a drawing for a couple days and think okay, how do I want to I want to do this dark moody piece. How do I want to do this? How do I want to do it? What is going to make it dark and moody? I know I want to paint dark and moody, but that doesn't necessarily just mean make it dark and purple. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's green, and the reason it's moody is because there's a really strong north light, that kind of casts crazy shadows over the faces of everything, or, I don't know. So yeah, when you're looking at the drawing and it's conveying the emotion and the concept that you have pictured in your head, I think that's how you know it's successful. It's hard to be happy with drawings for long. A lot of us get frustrated. You go back and look at a drawing you did 3 weeks ago, and you're like, I could have done this better. So, that is tough. But when you're in the moment and you're looking at a piece and you're like, you know when it's not there. I think it's when you're willing to admit that to yourself is when you are growing the most.
I think that's so important.
Breeze through it and be like, it's good enough. It's good enough. Okay, I want to do this, and I wanted to do this, but I drew this, and then I'm gonna polish this anyway, because it's there. I think that's a dangerous habit to get into when you can actually turn that Cintiq pen around and use the eraser and be like, I can do this better. Don't just because you did version 1 doesn't mean it's the best version. So I think you've got to do some exploration always before it really. You're really there. So it's usually never exactly the first version, but you'll know it when it's there.
Do you think that it's part of that is the better you get, the more easily you get to things that you like? The better you get at drawing?
I mean, absolutely, but your standards also get higher.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not there yet. I'm not there where I just do a drawing first try and I'm happy with it, I don't know anyone who is,
Right.
People, even the simplest of drawings, like I said, there's work that goes into them. And there are artists, I'm sure, that get it right first try. The most telling thing is, look at when you go to CTN, like a lot of us do, or any convention, and then you do you buy 1,000 art books like all of us do, and then you get the artist to draw on the covers. I would like people to find one artist whose drawing in the cover of their book matches the quality of the drawings inside their book. The little autographs that they do, because I guarantee you none of them match. And there's your proof right there.
Right.
The most amazing artists, their little doodles are not finished drawings.
Right.
There's no one, I don't think it exists, people that can get it right exactly the exact first time of the same quality. It's just that the proof is in the
maybe a good question to go along with Nicole's is when do you know when to scrap it? What kind of signs or indications are there when you go, I'm going to give up on this one and start that over again?
I did this, so I went through this recently, actually. I did a piece. I was really frustrated with it. I decided to come back to it. I came back to it, and I started from scratch. Same piece. Had the same issues. I wasn't getting the vibe that I wanted. And then I sent it to my friend Helen. She took a look at it, and she gave me some feedback, which was like, oh, like, of course, you know, and then I made the change, and then, like, finally, like, after hitting a ceiling on it, you know, 3 or 4 times in a row, I finally got something out of it that I liked, and that was the piece that was the little guy in the rabbit suit sitting on the stump. Yeah, so I had redrawn that so many times. I didn't have a character in it, and then I did have a character in it, and then I had him on the bottom of the stump, and the camera angle changed, and it was really tough. So, you know, how to know when you're to give up on something. I think when it's become apparent that you're not learning anything and you're not improving anything in a piece, you know, like every piece can always be improved, always. You know, even when it's done, there's always little things that can be made a little bit better. But recognizing when you are dumping more time into a piece than you feel like you're getting like a return out of it, you know, like if you are working on a piece that is going to take you, you know, another 20 hours to render, and even when you're done with it, you're pretty sure, like you're already seeing things, mistakes that are, you know, that shouldn't be, you know, that shouldn't be there, you know, and your piece isn't even finished. I think that's probably something that you can, a good point to be like, okay, I should probably stop working on this because there's so many errors that, you know, it's even at its most polished point, it's still going to be not
some
good.
of the maybe some of the raw elements are in the wrong places, or
that speaks to your process. You know, the reason that can occur first and foremost is if you start painting too fast and you don't solidify your drawing. You should always have a really strong drawing, and it doesn't have to be really tight drawing, but your overall composition, your shape usage, and your perspective, that information all has to be there. And then you can figure out little details once you start painting. Like, that's okay. Like, you don't have to necessarily know exactly what a lamp is going to look like, or, you know, some little detail like that, but knowing exactly the angle in which the lamp is going to be drawn, you know, then that you have to know. So when you leave really big holes in your work and then you skip, you know, finding the correct solutions, that's how you can end up with one of those pieces that just kind of destroys you, and, you know, you're coming back. That's what I did. You know, I had a concept. I was like, I'll figure this out. I'll figure it out in the painting. You know, no big deal. But the bottom line is I didn't figure it out. Like, I lied to myself, and it wasn't there. And then all I had to do was go back and I put a little white layer over it, and it was like, okay, I got to redraw this. And I redrew it in a much different way, and I was like, okay, that's correct. Now I can go back and actually put the color over it. So if you take the proper steps, you shouldn't get to that point where the piece is just like so bad that you need to scrap it and stop. But yeah, it has to be done every once in a while. You know, it happens to the best of us.
I couldn't have said it any better. I've gone through the whole process, the lying to yourself, the convincing of yourself, you know, that what you're doing is good when you know it's not. And I would say that probably, if I look back at all my failed paintings, they were probably all failed sketches. And so what I've come to the realization on is that when you start your sketch, as you're sketching, you're actually building the painting.
Yep.
You're already making the painting as you're making the sketch. And if you can remember that, it's taken me literally 20 years, and I still remind myself that. I'm working on a board game right now for a company, and I want to get, you know, I want to stay on schedule. I want to get certain pieces done by certain times. I've given myself little increments of when I have to get certain parts of it done, and I have to stop myself and go, know, you're wanting to rush into getting some color going so you can be done with this part, but you can polish the drawing more and figure a few more things out, and that will prevent you from having to do more fixes and more time later on. So I think that all kind of speaks to the same thing. So glad you said that.
Yeah, it's I mean, everyone does it. Like, everyone does it. Like, it's not something that, like, the best of the best are, you know, immune to. Like, everyone has those moments. We're all artists where we want to rush through something. We get a little overconfident, and we're like, yeah, like, I've got what it takes. Like, I'll finish this right away, you know. And you can still crank something out and get something out of it, but a lot of times it's not necessarily all that it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So but knowing when to either call it quits or, you know, knowing what to go back and fix is a really tough, tough thing. Asking your peers is great. You know, if you feel comfortable with showing it to a friend and getting just someone else's eyes on it, I would recommend doing that definitely before you scrap a piece. Because a lot of times it's just something really simple that you've overlooked because you've been looking at it so long. That's what it was with me. You know, that last piece that happened with me. So getting someone else's eyes on it is something that I would do first. And also, if you're not flipping your drawing, you should do that every time. Like, we have Photoshop, and it's amazing. And no reason not to use these tools. It is the gutsiest thing to do, I think, in working digitally, is to go into, you know, your transform and flip canvas horizontal, because it's going to expose every flaw in your piece. You know, if you have the guts to do that, then you have what it takes to fix it. So,
and by guts, you mean, are you willing to spend the time? Are you committed?
Yeah.
Are you committed to do what it takes?
It's the most brutal feedback you're gonna get. You know, like, you're gonna see it. Like, when you flip it, like, everything that's out of perspective and not looking, if one eye is too high or whatever, like, it's all gonna become apparent immediately. And it's not like no one's gonna break it to you gently. Be like, oh, this could be a little bit better. It's like your computer isn't even gonna say a word. It's just gonna blindly show you every mistake you've made in the last hour. So, if you have the guts to do that, I think then you can create amazing work all the time. But you just have to have the guts to do that.
No punching your computer.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. It's not the computer's fault. But that is a really important step.
Can we've been talking really good, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, because I know you got a life and work and everything. But I do want to see if we could get in a few more questions. These are mine, for students about wanting to go into doing the type of thing that you're doing. So I just have a few questions here, and we'll just see if we have time for them.
That's okay.
What would you say is the most important thing for students to have in their portfolio? Like, let's say you're involved in someone coming to your place of business where you work, and maybe you get called in to look at a portfolio. What are you going to be looking for? What's like your number one and number two? I know there's a ton of things. We could probably come up with a list of 10 or 20, but what would you say the top 2 or 3?
Other than, I already touched on individual style, so I'll go there. Character and environment work is important. People who show up with just environment. If you're a character artist and that's all you are, then, you know, great. You better be the best damn character artist, you know, ever. Because think about how good character artists are who are already working. You know, you're setting yourself up for an enormous mountain to climb, you know, if you're only character work. So, you know, characters in environments, you know, showing a good understanding of how to build a piece of artwork, thinking about the entire piece is really important. There's a lot of people that, you know, have amazing character work, and you can see even their fully rendered illustrations are characters with backgrounds filled in that don't really have any detail in them. Doing fully realized worlds is really important. You know, something where you have given not just the character the attention to detail, but, you know, how does the character's surroundings support telling us who this character is?
What do trees look like? What do vehicles look like? What do houses look like?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, if you think about, let's say you got a man, a drawing of a simple drawing of a man. Like, let's say it's like the guy from Paperman or whatever. He's just standing blank in the screen, and then you put a background in behind him, which is a bedroom that's clothes everywhere. You got pictures hanging off the walls. All of a sudden, that guy isn't just a guy; he's a guy who's really messy, and it's the same character design.
Mm-hmm.
The character design hasn't changed a bit, but all of a sudden, we know something more about him, because of his environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, thinking about those storytelling elements that transcend just the character and actually, are visual or are apparent in the entire, body of work is really important.
What does a portfolio look like where you open it up and you're like, I know we're not hiring this person right now?
I don't want to be offensive.
No, but I think you can say it in a way where it's if you can, I mean, where
yeah, I mean,
that's helpful.
Artists who conform to a mass-produced style of art that lack originality and anatomical, kind of
incorrectness.
Yeah. Like if you're just doing, if everything in your portfolio has, googly eyes or something like that, that's great, and that shows me you're really good at drawing googly eyes, but that doesn't necessarily show me that you can apply that skill to something else.
Right.
Can you, if you're really good at drawing one thing, you're really good at drawing one thing, and you say, I can draw other things, I'm really good at drawing, X, but don't worry, I can draw other things, it's like, okay, but the bottom line is you have to prove it,
Right.
You can tell yourself that, but actually telling yourself you can do it and actually doing it are two different things.
So being one-dimensional is a kind of a killer.
Being one-dimensional, yeah, it could be stylistically, it could be content, it could be color-wise. Being one-dimensional in any facet is a portfolio killer.
Okay.
And that's the unfortunate reality because there's so many talented artists out there. You have to either be the best at one thing or you have to do everything good.
Right.
And it's a little bit intimidating, but that's the case, unfortunately.
Are there enough jobs out there for the really, really good? Like if you come out of your school and you're really good, are you going to be able to find a home?
No. I'm really sorry to say that there's just not enough jobs. There's art school. It's a really hip, trendy major. Going into biz dev. It's awesome. It's super romantic. But the bottom line is there's so few jobs out there. You have to fight tooth and nail to get a job, and it's really crappy. I think artists, and that's not to say that everyone who's doing a job is amazingly talented. There are people that have jobs that are not of the highest caliber.
Why? So why do they?
Why do they have the jobs?
Yeah.
That's a really tough question. I mean, because talent isn't everything. It requires business sense. It requires people skills. Knowledge of how to create a brand. Branding yourself, creating a good image. There's people that have and connections. Who you know is everything, really. Getting out there and meeting people. You have to know about people.
That's sad to hear because I always want to feel like you can make it on your merits, but
no.
Oh.
It sucks, and I think that's how it used to be, but the bottom line is if there's, person A and person B, and they're both equally talented, but person A happens to know someone who works in the studio, they're going for person A.
Okay, so you're saying all things being equal with the work, because I would think that it's a detriment to carry some dead weight if they're not good at what they're supposed to be good at.
A secret is that art studio jobs are the same as every other job that you'll hear about. There's the same BS, the same, could be nepotism, could be, whatever, the politics that go into everyday life are apparent in studio jobs as well. There are people that are not good at their jobs, but they hold their jobs anyway because they know somebody or they've been there really long, they're tenured or whatever. There's all sorts of those things come into play. And there are stages where there's very low tolerance for that kind of stuff, and there's stages where that stuff is tolerated across the board. Like I've worked in places where there's people are there because they're there.
Wow.
It's not because they're best suited for the project, but they're already there, so that's why they're there. So
that is very interesting to hear. This is why I love doing this, is because I'm learning.
Yeah, I mean
I would have never guessed that. I really thought that it was so cutthroat as far as the skill level that I would have guessed the opposite. So wow.
If everyone were to leave their jobs right now, everyone, and then all of a sudden all the jobs would get filled up again. Like not everyone would get their same job. There's people who have been in the industry for super long that even say like, if I were to be looking for a job now, I wouldn't get hired. These kids nowadays are way better than me. I've heard really talented artists say that, and it's sometimes true.
That right there, I would definitely say is true, because my students, and I've said this on other videos, my students draw way better than I did coming out of school, and that's probably because, one, I wasn't committed myself to drawing. I didn't really enjoy drawing as much as painting, and I would dive right into the painting, always, and my early work really suffered. But yeah, I agree with that. The artists coming out today are amazing.
Yeah, and it's really, I hate to say this, to students coming out nowadays, because it's really disheartening. Like finding a job is really hard. The only way to get a job is to prove that you can do something better than someone who already has a job.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want to break into feature animation, like you have to be better than all those people that you see in the art books, and that's just a fact. Because those are the people that are working there right now. If they're gonna not renew their contract and pick you up instead, look at your work. Do you really think that you have what it takes to do that, or do you think that you have the potential to get there?
Mm.
Because you're not going to get there right out of school. There are people who do get there right out of school, and that's like hitting the lottery. However, that's like being right in front of the right door at the right time. But the bottom line is it takes time. And something that when I taught, I stressed to students is that it's okay to not get a job right out of school.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a job right out of school. I worked a side job for 1.5 years before I got a job. I did little freelance jobs here and there, and that's how it is. I think you do your best work after you get out of school. That's the most valuable time, I think, as an artist, because you know what you want to do. You're not bogged down by any sort of time restraints. Get a part-time job if you can, and then make as much personal work of the best quality as you can, because that is going to be the last opportunity that you have to do that.
Would you, if I'm trying to think, if I were a student and I were trying to get a job, and let's say I'm working, I'm making all the right moves, my work quality is going up, so I'm working in my spare time. I'm working at Home Depot or something during the day.
Yeah.
But at night I'm just going crazy and I'm improving my craft. Would you send postcards or anything, or leave behinds at a job, and just constantly keep leaving stuff so they can see it? What would you do if you're trying to? There's a formal application process, but it sounds like you're saying that maybe some people might move to the front of the line based on who they know, and we all know how things go when people get hired. They put out a listing, but sometimes it's filled before.
Oh yeah, it does. Applying online is like you're a drop in the bucket. It's really
right,
hard.
exactly. It's impersonal. To me, it's the worst way to get a job is to apply online when you don't know anybody.
Yeah, I've heard of very few people actually getting jobs like that. I think the most important thing you can do is networking, being friends with people. Letting people know you're not crazy. That you're cool. Like people know and like you as a person, and then get to know your artwork. If you think about, I go to CTN. which everyone should do, if you're trying to get into animation. You
Are you
have to.
going this year, by the way?
Yeah, I'll have a table. I will
I'll
be
see
there.
you there. I'm gonna
All
go.
right, sweet. Um, I come home with a bucket full of postcards, and the bottom line is, it's not that I don't want to remember you, but because you get so oversaturated by, postcards and leave behinds and a lot of work that doesn't really stand out just from the postcard, because a postcard, even the most amazing painting on a postcard, is still just a postcard,
Yeah.
But if you spend time and you talk with me and you're really cool, I'll remember you, and I don't even know your work, and I'll look up your work later, and then when I see you next year, I'm not going to remember you because you gave me a postcard. I'll remember you because you had a cool conversation with me.
It's so important. That's such an important thing, because making the wrong hire is really tough for a company, because like you said, if you're psycho or something. By the way, if you're psycho and you're watching this, just forget about
it. Psycho doesn't, I don't want to be insensitive to anyone, by using that term. But in terms of, if you're not pleasant to work with or to spend a significant amount of time in close quarters with, and if you have you just need a little bit of development in terms of your people skills, is what I mean by saying that. Because when you work at a studio, you're around people all the time. You're right next to them, and you have to say things to them that they don't want to hear. You have to know how to deliver it professionally. You have to have good personal hygiene. There's so many things like that are. Yeah, there are issues, that you don't necessarily think actually exist, but the world is, it's not as ideal as everyone thinks it is,
Right.
Like, there are things that, they want to make sure that you shower every day before you get a studio job,
We're all weird we're all weird in different ways.
Yeah.
But if you can identify where you're weird and you know it, and then you can fake it when you're at work and not be weird just for those hours.
No, I mean, it's
you're around people.
We want that. I mean, we want, you want someone who's like nerdy and who's going to nerd out with you about certain things. Everyone wants that. No one wants like the perfect guy in the corner of the room.
Right.
Like everyone has flaws. It's just a matter of like having the right flaws that mesh with the studio.
Right.
It's not necessarily about being perfect. Like I've got flaws. I'm late for work. But
the reality for me was when I haven't worked. Since I left school, I haven't really had a full-time job. But when I was in school, I had a job, and my boss would bring people in and interview them, and we had cubicles so we could all hear the interview going on,
That's
and he'd bring someone in, he'd interview them, he'd ask questions, they'd talk about their resume, talk about all their qualifications, and after they'd leave, he'd say, "What'd you think of that person?" And the conversation was just about personality. It had nothing to do. We were going to teach them the job. So the reality is, if you don't already know this, what you're talking about is you have to come across as normal for the most part, right?
Yeah, I mean, normal is more. It's more just like of a, good natured. Yeah, people skills are important. They're just as important as a portfolio. If you are intolerable to work with, but you have really strong work, you better have really damn strong work. There's a line of people that goes around the block that has work just as good as yours that won't be abrasive, that would be happy to take your position.
Yeah.
And that's the sad it's the sad reality for students nowadays, is that it is tough. There's not enough jobs out there because schools are capitalizing on interest. It's no secret. There are schools that just churn out people. And it does the students a disservice. But the bottom line is something that I've come to learn: if you're making work that you're content with, I don't think it matters what you do with your day job. If you are a part of the culture, and you are doing work that you're really proud of on a regular basis, and you're in the mix with artists, you got a blog, you got a following, or as long as you're happy, then who cares where you work? I talked before about how I come home after work and I do personal work, and at best I'm at 30% energy level when I start my personal work. You go work at, you're a barista for a few hours a day, and then you come home, and then you sit down with 100% energy level to do your personal work, you're going to create some damn good work. And there's respect in that, Like, I envy my friends who are full-time, artists for themselves, and they make only work they want to do. Like, how awesome does that sound? But the bottom line is, it's not everyone is cut out for it. But it is respectable. No one's going to look down upon you, if you're not at a studio.
Yeah.
It's okay to just do personal work and be an artist, because there's people who, like I said before, get the studio job and then they don't even create personal work for themselves anymore.
Right.
So there's, neither side is, the given answer. Like, the grass is always greener. There's
exactly
on both sides of that fence, though. Yeah.
Yep. Wow, this has been great. I'm so glad that we had this conversation, that you were able to do this, because I think you really provided some really good answers to some questions that I had, and I'm sure students have. It's not, sounds like it's not an easy road, but it never has been, and it hasn't been for. I mean, when I was in school, they basically painted this picture of a completely impossible dream. So that hasn't changed. I do believe for freelance illustrators, it's harder now in many ways, but it always was. And there's still plenty of opportunity, and I'm not going to go into that because we've run out of time. But I've talked about that on other videos too. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. But the bottom line, I think, is what you talked about, Isaac, is that you have to be really committed, and you have to be really passionate about it. And you have to love what you're doing, and if you do all those things, your artwork's going to get better and better and better. And as it gets better, it opens more and more doors, right?
Yeah, and the bottom line, like, as a student, if someone told me how hard it is now, I wouldn't have stopped, But the bottom line is, like, there were nights where I was, like, in absolute despair over, like, the fact that I didn't have a job. I had no hopes, of getting one, a studio job, which is what I really wanted, but, like, I kept doing it anyway. If you feel like if you're not up for tackling those kind of personal demons and, like, trudging through those hard times, then don't do it. You know what I mean? But if you feel like you're up to that challenge and you're going to stick it out for the long haul, then, don't let anyone tell you no. You should never give up, and always chase your dreams. There's no reason to call it quits before you even give it a shot. So always give it a shot. Like, always give it your best try. But if that kind of competition isn't something that you feel like you're cut out for, or if that kind of challenge doesn't excite you, then, you might want to stick with, hey, maybe I can, I'll do personal work, and that's okay, but it is that hard, unfortunately, and the times will get tough, even when you get the studio job, those layoffs, the layoff train comes around to everyone soon.
That was another question I was going to ask you. Do you think it's more stable in a game studio or in or in like an animation studio for film or something like that? You just heard all these guys from
a lot of games are big right now. Games are really big because there's good money in games, and the mobile platform is exploding. It's a very different kind of work than a lot of people are, maybe catering their portfolios to, but it's still fun. When the going is good, the going is really good. When the going is bad, the going is really bad in game. I've seen both sides of that spectrum.
Oh.
Animation work differently. Games usually you're full time, and that's awesome as long as your company's doing well and your game's doing well. But if your company's not doing well and your game's not doing well, then you better cover your ass pretty quick, because the artists are the first ones to go usually. But animation, you're on a contract. There are people who work full time at animation companies, but a lot of times they're just there for the end of their show, and then they get cut loose. So they're both, if you're at a gaming company that's doing well and is really stable, I think that is the sweet spot. Or if you're at an animation studio and you've proven your worth, that you can contribute in more ways than just one and on more products than just one, but the bottom line is your contract's going to be up. You're going to have to fight for a spot on a new show at some point. So either way, it all depends on how good the product is doing. Because there's people who've been in animation companies for crazy long amounts of time, and then they get let go for the simplest of reasons, just because their bottom line is they're just data.
Yeah.
There are dollar signs that need to get cut, and that's all they really represent when it comes to the corporate side of things. So, yeah, it's really tough. I think that games is looking better right now in terms of opportunity. There's not a lot of, there's got to be a handful. I'm talking like a handful of jobs that open up in BizDev every year. Like, not a
Really?
lot. Yeah, I mean, how many people do you know getting hired at animation companies every year?
Well, I don't. You know, it's funny because I don't, but it's not really my world either. But I know some of you guys,
Yeah.
right? And then we have students come out. But yeah, I don't hear of a lot of students just landing jobs. But we're not really prepping them for biz dev either. We're more of an illustration program.
Yeah, I mean it's the unfortunate reality is there's only a handful of people getting jobs every year in animation and at least in that specific field.
Mm-hmm.
You want to switch fields, maybe there's more story artists getting brought on or whatever, but biz dev there's only only a handful, and games I think there's a lot, the ups and downs are way more in games. There's a lot more people getting hired, but there's people getting let go all the time. So it's just about riding that wave, I know in the last few years, like I could count probably like 8 game companies that have gone under that I know of. You don't hear the same about animation studios going under, because every time a game company goes under, all those people flood to other companies, so it's kind of riding that, you're going to bounce from place to place, depending on what game company is doing really well. But finding someplace really stable, a game company that's really stable, I think is your best bet.
Well, that's good. It's good to know. I'm glad I'm not really in that job hunt right now because it kind of makes me feel a little. I get a little nervous for someone who is, but it's good information to know. And do they ever? Would it be possible to like start as a janitor at one of these places and just kind of leave your drawings around or something?
I mean, I think in the good old days, yes. It was who was it? Was it Jason Deemer did that? He drew pictures on. I think Jason Deemer. I might be wrong, so please don't quote me on this. But I think he told a story about like how he drew pictures on people's coffee cups, and then people started to notice that. Yeah, I think in the good old days that was possible. I don't think it's possible nowadays. There's a lot of people in a lot of positions. The only way that works is by getting to know people. And that is really important. You will get to know people, and that is huge. But the bottom line is, you also don't want them to look at you as a PA or a janitor, because they're not going to hire a janitor to do biz dev on their film.
Right.
Unless you're like a prodigy that's been in hiding. Like there's a reason. It's another sad and unfortunate fact of life is you're going to label you run the risk of potentially labeling yourself as something else, and then once people have that image in their mind, then it's very hard to switch. I know a lot of people that. That being said, I think that's actually pretty cool. If you are really into art, but you know that maybe you aren't cut out for viz dev, or maybe those doors just haven't opened for you, but you really want to be a part of the culture, then maybe going into something like recruiting or production or any of that stuff, like it's cool, I think, to have your hand in something in another way, and then you have all that energy to go home and like do personal work. So it's okay to do those things. Like I don't want to diminish that at all, because I think that's a very, very important, like people who understand art and who appreciate art and even know how to make art in other parts of companies, I think is great. Because it's so hard explaining like the creative process to people that have no idea how it works. Like that's a very tough thing to do as a studio artist. So, having artistically inclined people in other positions is absolutely great, and it makes everything go smoother. So that's another door to look into if maybe the art, the full-time art position isn't opening for you. Whatever, not because you're not good enough, maybe it's just you haven't been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. That's also, there's something to be said for that. Being around a creative environment that makes you want to go home and draw, and maybe like because Starbucks isn't doing that for you, going another career route is great. Why not? Who cares?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's great, man. I'm just I can't wait for some of my students to be able to listen to this, and and I think they're going to get a lot out of it. I really appreciate you being very open and very helpful with that, with answers and stuff like that. I think it's invaluable. There's, what students don't get in school is probably a lot of this kind of straight talk kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's really important for them. So
that's why going out and meeting with artists and reaching out to your favorite artists on their blogs and whatever is really important. You should always ask questions and ask for straight talk from artists. They will give it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Isaac.
Thank you
so much for being willing to do this.
It was great. Yeah, we'll do it again sometime. It was a lot of fun.
I'll look forward to meeting you in November at CTN, and so you're gonna have a booth out there and selling.
I'll have a booth. I'll have a full color sketchbook for the first time, which is gonna
cool.
be fun. And then I'll have some Sketch Dailies merchandise, like some T-shirts and stuff, which hopefully people will purchase, so I can keep running that website.
You'll need to sign one of those books for me.
All right, I will have it. I haven't even assembled it yet. I got to start getting that together, but I'm trying to make as much work as possible, and I'm having a couple cool surprises on the table. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, make sure you stop by. There's going to be some really fun stuff.
Definitely will be. I will not have a booth. I'm going to teach a class with Jake Parker, and so I'm going to have the time to. It's my first year going down there, so I'm just going to.
You're in for a
kind of look around and meet all the people that I've always wanted to meet and geek out and all that good stuff.
Really important, if you can, students, go. Go talk to artists. It's amazing. Especially if you live in other parts of the country. I lived in Baltimore and I didn't know anyone. Everyone I met I owe to CTN, because I went year after year and slowly built my. I went not knowing a single person, and now I know almost everyone. All the exhibitors and everything, because that's what you're there. Everyone's there to network and stuff. So going there, it can make up for years worth of not, being in the right place at the right time. Going to conventions is an invaluable resource. So I really recommend going.
I'm sure it'd be very expensive for people that don't live in the U.S. to make it there, but wow, it still would be really really helpful if they could. And it's the Creative Talent Network, right? That's what CTN stands for.
People do it. It's just really, it's really expensive, but it's been the highlight of my year for the past 4 years. So I think it's definitely worth the price. You won't regret it. It's just a matter of biting the bullet and doing it. Pack 100 people in a hotel room, if you have to. The airfare sucks, and they're raising the prices astronomically on tickets and stuff like that. So hopefully they don't continue to do that. But no matter the cost, I think it's worth it.
Cool.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Yeah, I gotta get to work.
We've kept you long enough. Thank you so much for doing this, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.